The global economy also saw some serious turbulence in 2022. We spoke with the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, as she wrapped up year-end business at the IMF here in Washington. China has been this hub of cheap manufacturing for the world. We are all so dependent on it. But right now, it looks like COVID cases are exploding as they start peeling back those zero COVID restrictions. What will that mean for the global economy, long and short term?
In the short term, bad news. China has slowed down dramatically in 2022 because of this tight zero COVID policy. For the first time in 40 years, China's growth in 2022 is likely to be at or below global growth. And looking into next year, for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, the relaxation of COVID restrictions would mean bushfire COVID cases throughout China. I was in China last week in a bubble in a city where there is zero COVID, but that is not going to last once the Chinese people start traveling.
They don't have an effective vaccine right now.
The vaccinations fall behind. They have not worked on antiviral treatments and how that can be offered to people. And they will go through this tough time. If they stay the course, over time, they would be able to catch up with the rest of the world. But for the next couple of months, it would be tough for China. And the impact on Chinese growth would be negative. The impact on the region would be negative. The impact on global growth would be negative.
You said that you fear that we are sleepwalking into a world that is poorer and less secure because of a split in the global economy between the U.S. and China. What do you mean by that?
The way we have operated created excessive dependency in global chains. We were too focused on cost. How can we make products cheaper? And COVID and then the senseless war Russia started against Ukraine have shown that this is not enough. We have to think of the security of supplies. And that means diversify the sources of products that make the economy function well, lifting up the level of cost. But we shouldn't go beyond.
One of your IMF researchers gave a pretty dire prediction. Overall, this year's shocks will reopen economic wounds that were only partially healed post-pandemic. In short, the worst is yet to come. And for many people, 2023 will feel like a recession. What do we need to brace for?
For most of the world economy, this is going to be a tough year, tougher than the year we leave behind. Why? Because the three big economies, US, EU, China, are all slowing down simultaneously. The US is most resilient. The US may avoid a recession. We see the labor market remaining quite strong. This is, however, a mixed blessing because if the labor market is very strong, the Fed may have to keep interest rates tighter for longer to bring inflation down. The EU, very severely hit by the war in Ukraine. Half of the European Union will be in recession next year. China is going to slow down this year further. Next year would be a tough year for China. And that translates into negative trends globally. When we look at the emerging markets and developing economies, there the picture is even direr. Why? Because on top of everything else, they get hit by high interest rates and by the appreciation of the dollar. For those economies that have high level of debt, this is a devastation.
I want to make sure I get to Ukraine. President Zelensky said they need $55 billion in foreign support next year. He expects $20 billion from the IMF. Is he going to get it?
We are working on providing support for Ukraine. We have assessed the needs of Ukraine to range somewhere between $3 and $5 billion a month. What Putin did with destroying critical infrastructure in Ukraine, this is horrific. And it means that in the next months, the country would be more on the high end of this range because it is put in an awful position to have to restore access to electricity, to heat, to water. Ukraine has proven to be remarkably resilient. The Ukrainian economy is functioning. Pensions are being paid. When there is bombardment, restoration of energy, water, heat is done very quickly. And we see revenues collected in Ukraine in a very disciplined manner to support the functioning of the country.
So the government's not going to collapse?
The government is very well functioning under incredibly difficult circumstances. No, they're not going to collapse. And another thing that is so remarkable is actually the world has proven to be more resilient than we feared a year in the beginning of the year. We look at the response to the energy shock in Europe, and Europe is moving towards independence from Russia decisively. Yes, there will be a tough winter. Maybe the next one would be even tougher. But freedom from dependence on Russia is coming.
How do you describe the state of U.S. economics and politics?
The U.S. economy, remarkably resilient. Decision-making in the U.S., because of the way the political set is at the moment, it is more difficult. But nonetheless, the U.S. has taken some very important steps that are helping to the U.S. economy. But I do hope that the U.S. is not going to slip into recession, despite all these risks. We expect 1/3 of the world economy to be in recession. And yes, as you said, even countries that are not in recession, it would feel like recession for countries of millions of people. But if that resilience of the labor market in the U.S. holds, the U.S. would help the world to get through a very difficult year.
Madam Managing Director, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.